afternoon. I have just completed a friendly lunch with the President, in the course of which we had a very on our mutual relations and on the future for Colombia. Our discussion covered many topics. We have, for instance, discussed the investment and trade. Pardon me. Thank you. Our discussion covered many topics, including, for instance, the investment and trade of Britain with Colombia. We discussed human rights, and I have welcomed the steps that have been taken under President Pastrana's government to make sure that the police and the army are there to uphold human rights, not to break human rights, and that there is no culture of impunity anywhere within Colombia. Britain is funding the UN Human Rights Office in Colombia. We are very pleased to be both providing that funds and delighted with the cooperation we are receiving from President Pastrana and from his government. But of course the focus of our discussion was on Plan Colombia, to bring peace to Colombia and also to make sure that the drugs trafficking from Colombia is brought to an end. I very much welcome the vision and the courage that President Pastrana has shown in preparing an ambitious program to make sure that there is an end to the drugs production in Colombia and an end to the violence within his country. The problem of Colombia in relation to the drugs trafficking is not just a problem in Colombia, it is our problem as well. All of us in the world are at risk when drugs are produced and drugs are put into the world drugs trade. All of us also suffer when the environment of the rainforest is put at risk by those who are chopping down the rainforest to plant the coca leaf, or who are putting the precursor chemicals into the rivers of Colombia. That is why Britain is keen to support President Pastrana and to make a reality of Plan Colombia. We have discussed the ways in which the international community can be of assistance, and we look forward to the pledging conference in Spain in July to provide international support for the plan. Britain is keen to play a full part. In particular, we want to make sure that the countries of Europe and elsewhere in the world, North America and some of the neighbors in Latin America, also share in this project. I have offered to President Pastrana that Britain will take the lead in hosting in London a gathering of officials and technical experts in advance of that pledging conference in July, so that we can together discuss the details of Plan Colombia and work out how each of us can best contribute to it. I would hope that we will be able to bring together North America and Europe and the European Commission to agree on how we can all share in finding a solution to what is a common problem for all of us. And in that spirit, I would now invite President Pastrana to talk about Plan Colombia, about his hopes for Colombia, and the help that we can provide.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much. I think there's not too many more things to say after you, Mr. Secretary.
I apologize.
No, it's good. We came here to add the support, and we said to Secretary Cook about how important it is for us your support in Plan Colombia. As we've said, we have one common enemy, that is narco-trafficking. And unfortunately, narco-trafficking is financed the violence in my country, but at the same time indirectly in Europe and in the whole world. And that's why we are promoting what we have called a Plan Colombia, a $7.5 billion plan for the next 3 years. We Colombians, we hope to support this plan with near $4 to $5 billion. And the rest we're asking for the international community, that in a common effort we could fight this enemy that is narco-trafficking. As Secretary Cook said, it's very important for the meeting that he's going to gather here in London, inviting the members of the European Union, starting the social projects, the alternative development projects that we're going to take to the donors table in Madrid on the first week of July. All these projects basically are concentrated in social development, alternative development programs for the illicit crops in our country, and the strengthening of our institutions. And that's once again we want to thank your support, Mr. Secretary, and we know that with your help and the help of the European Union also we will be in the front line in this fight against drugs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I thank the Colombian delegation, including the Foreign Minister, Dr. De Soto, who have been with us and who have led us in a very informative and useful exchange of views. Can I invite your questions?
Foreign Secretary Jeff Mead from Sky News. May I ask you to divert briefly to Zimbabwe? What's Britain's reaction to the reluctance of Harare to act on the latest court judgment?
I did predict I've already put out a statement. I very much welcome the court order. I very much hope that that court decision will now be carried out by the government of Zimbabwe and by its police. The rights of any people within Zimbabwe are the rights of all the people of Zimbabwe. And if those rights are infringed on some, they're pretty risk for all of them. Now, I will not, if you'll forgive me saying more on this occasion, but I will be giving a separate press conference later this afternoon when I'm with the Commonwealth Secretary General. Jerry.
Apologies to my colleague journalists. May I just ask you a brief question about the trial that started today in Tehran? I understand that Britain was led to believe the trial would be open. In fact, was closed this morning. What protests are being made? What efforts are being made by the British government in this regard?
Well, I've been engaged in Zimbabwe and Colombia this morning, but I will be getting a full report and I will tell be open and that there should be proper legal representation for the response we can make, but we want to see that happen and we'll continue the pressure to do so. Now, can I have some questions at Colombia?
Please. And sir, could we ask first of all that you reply in Spanish for Latin American audiences and not in English? I was going to say that some people might ask if you're serious about bringing peace, if you're serious about Plan Colombia, why have you so far declined to accept the ELM's call for the North to be demilitarized and peace talks to start immediately?
Spanish?
Spanish first.
A ver, nosotros con el ELN hemos venido trabajando desde el inicio de nuestro gobierno y en este momento estamos celebrando conversaciones. Nosotros aspiramos a que podamos llegar precisamente a iniciar un proceso de diálogo y al igual que lo hemos hecho con la FARC, de negociación con el Ejército de Liberación Nacional. Se han hecho propuestas por parte del ELN hacia el gobierno ha hecho contrapropuestas para poder iniciar estas conversaciones y nosotros aspiramos a que muy pronto podamos iniciar este proceso de paz y de negociación con el Ejército de Liberación Nacional.
And for English-speaking audiences, sir?
Is that okay? I'll try. We've been, since the start of my government, we've been having a conversation with the ELN movement. There have been some proposals from the ELN to the government regarding a demilitarized zone. There have been some proposals from the government to the ELN. We've been having discussions for the last months, and we hope that these discussions will go further, and we hope that very soon we could not only start a dialogue process with the ELN, but also start a negotiation process with the ELN similar to the one that we are having with the FARC at this moment.
Now, do we have a Colombian journalist? Yes, please, over there.
I just wanted to ask a question to Mr. Cook. The aid that you are thinking or envisaged for Colombia is through the European Union or is for only Britain on its own? And a question for Mr. Pastrana. What so far the response that you have found to your calling for help for your problem?
Can I just say, of course, we would want the European Union to play a full part, and Britain pays a large part of the funds of the European Union. That would, of course, be a collective decision, but we would be very keen to play a leading part within Europe to try and make sure we mobilize those resources. President Pastrana?
Yes, I think that we have full supporters. I think, as Secretary Cook said, it's very important for us that now the United Kingdom is very involved and they're willing to take the leadership in this proposal of gathering here in London members of the European Union, even members of Latin America that could be willing to go to the donors table, and maybe some of Asia. But I think this leadership is going to be very important for the Colombian plan. As you will know, the Colombian plan is concentrated in the peace process, fighting also one common enemy that is drugs, and strengthening our institution, and at the same time is looking forward how we could promote and educate more people in defending the human rights in our country. And that's why we think this support that we're having here today is going to be very important for the donors table that is going to be held the first week of July in Madrid, Spain.
Please.
Yes.
Could you just tell us how your meeting was with the Foreign Secretary and what things you agreed on and what things you didn't agree on, please?
No, I think that we talk a lot of issues. First of all, we want to give a whole view of what is happening in Colombia, in the economy, in the fight on narcotics, what is happening with Plan Colombia, the peace process, and at the same time a lot of bilateral. We study and we talk about the bilateral relationship between our two countries. There's a very good relation in the fight on drugs. I think results of the cooperation between the United Kingdom and Colombia has been very important for us in the fight on drugs. We've done a lot of seizures in the exchange of information that we have between our two countries. We gave a whole view of what's happening in the peace process and how, as I said before, the UK can be involved in leadership in Europe, Plan Colombia. At the end, we have one common enemy, that it's narco-trafficking. It's the one that is financing the violence in our country and outside of Colombia. And that's why we think also it's very important to talk about human rights, as we did, what's happening in our country, the help, the support that you're giving to us. As you will know, and the Secretary said, Great Britain is financing the Human Rights Office, one of the countries that is financing the Human Rights Office of the United Nations in Colombia. We extended for 2 more years their presence in our country, and I think that also was a very important issue of discussion in our lunch.
Volviendo al tema de la paz, Raúl Reyes, vocero de las FARC, dijo que estaba esperando que el gobierno hiciera una propuesta sobre cómo, cuánto tiempo y de qué duración sería un posible alto al fuego.
Bueno, yo creo que eso es un tema que se está llevando a la mesa de negociación. Yo creo que este sería un primer paso muy importante, un cese al fuego y un cese de hostilidades, que yo creo que el país está esperando gestos por parte de la insurgencia frente a este tema. Y lógicamente es un tema que se va a discutir y esperamos que se discuta muy pronto en la propia mesa de negociación.
Any other questions? One over here and then we will go.
What sort of measures against the narco-traffickers will be made possible by Plan Colombia and by the money which you're hoping to obtain from countries like Britain?
What kind of
measures?
Measures? Oh, there's a lot. I think that we have to see the 2 points, or 2 ways the problem of narco-trafficking. First of all the policing aspect, the repression problem. We need assistance, the military assistance, basically for interdiction. For the first time, I think, in our country, the armed forces, the police, the Navy, it's really involved in fighting narcotics. But at the same time, we need money to invest in social development, alternative development, so that we could get really rid of these illicit crops. And that's why in the Plan Colombia, 25% of these $7.5 billion are going to be invested in the military fight against narco-trafficking, and 75% of the whole budget of Plan Colombia is going to be invested in social investment and alternative development. I think we need to see both phases. But at the same time, as Secretary Cook said, we have to point out the problem and the damage that the drug is not only doing to our children, in our countries, in the streets of our countries, but also to the environment. In Colombia, we have destroyed more than 1 million hectares of rainforest to bring cocaine or poppy fields into our country. All the chemicals, the precursors, many of them come from Europe and are used in the process to get cocaine or heroin, are thrown into the rivers. And at the same time, those rivers are destroying also the rainforest. You will know, for example, that every time that we push outer and southern of the country and in other regions of Colombia, they are starting to destroy the rainforest. And you will know that the Amazon, only to put an example, produces 60% of the oxygen of the world. And if we are starting to destroy these rainforests, the problem that you will see will not be happening only in our hemisphere or in Colombia or in South America, but also here in Europe. That's why we need to put all the efforts and unite the efforts to fight this common enemy that is narco-trafficking.
Thank you very much, President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I am truly honored for the invitation to give the Canning Lecture at the dawning of the new century. In the past, well-known representatives of the arts and sciences have given this lecture. The mere mention of two great Hispano-Americans, such as Salvador de Madariaga and Jorge Luis Borges, is eloquent evidence of the high academic level of those who have preceded me in this lecture. The Canning House has been the natural home of the ties of friendship between the United Kingdom and the Iberian and Ibero-American communities in Great Britain for the past 60 years. I take great pride in knowing that my country's special policy of rapprochement and support to the Canning House has translated into material and tangible realities. The Salón Colombia, presently in operation at the Belgravian facilities, is a symbol of that special relationship. It is equally important for me, in my capacity as Latin American president, that this institution was named after George Canning, who did, as you said, Mr. Minister, so much for our countries in the early decades of the 19th century in the community of free and democratic societies. Canning's interest in strengthening ties between the United Kingdom and the new American republics, it's similar to the interest shown by our Libertador Simón Bolívar in his letter to Antonio José de Sucre when he says, "An alliance with England has more political importance for us than the Battle of Ayacucho." Third Canning and Bolívar had different interests. Besides strengthening mutual relations, both sought a policy contrary to absolutism, inspiring civil liberties and open to trade and the internationalization of the economy. Great Britain and Colombia still find common ground in that same vision. When one land on British soil, history, with all its drama and evolution, becomes evident before our very eyes. Ever since the early days of representative democracy in the 13th century to date, Great Britain has been and still is living proof that a civilized society is not built overnight. Its development is not a miracle of one day, rather the summation of many crises, of time of apogee and depression, and swinging between times of peace and confrontation. The United Kingdom history has taught the world many lessons of courage and wisdom. Colombia, like many other nations in our contemporary world, has a long and complex history full of successes and failures. Much has yet to be done on the basis of our own values, political culture and institutions, all forget amidst more difficulties and obstacles than any other country in Latin America. Like other countries, Colombia has lived extended periods of peace during which it planted the seeds of its development. Yet, Those years have been followed by violent confrontations that threatened to destroy its very foundations. However, and in spite of the difficult challenges, Colombians continue working in favor of a better future, confident in our institutions, and knowing that in the past we have witnessed once and again the magnificence of our people. Fortunately, in my country, the exercise of democracy, free elections, the respect for fundamental liberties, the advancement of human rights, including all social and economic rights, as well as the so-called third-generation rights, it's still a fundamental characteristic of our political system. Sometimes we forget that Colombia built respectful institutions patiently, that it was withstood the furious attacks of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world for several lustrums, that it has never parted from democracy, that the legitimacy of its government is indisputable, and that its leaders have spared no efforts to open political participation to all the sectors of our society. Colombia has been and still is a bastion of democracy, politically and economic stability in Latin America. As to the development of our political institution, Colombia has always been a sound constitutional democracy characterized by a rich electoral history and great institutional stability throughout its 200 years of republican life. Like any democracy, it has had and still has imperfections, but we have always had the will to overcome them without ever transiting the road of authoritarianism. The government I have the honor of presiding was elected during an electoral process whose transparency has never been put in doubt by anyone, and registering the highest number of votes in the history of the country. The transfer of power from my predecessor, a member of the opposite political party, was free of trauma and setbacks. The different branches of our public power are independent and autonomous, and our control bodies fulfill their duties with complete independence. On the other hand, Colombia's economy has been managed according to the most rigorous foreign analysis in a manner defined as prudent and orthodox. This has enabled us to successfully overcome situations that have proven critical in other economies of the region. In this context, last year's recession is an unfortunate exception. There is no doubt that Colombia lives today a series of circumstances that are testing us as a nation, yet we are sure that we will overcome them and that we will emerge with renewed vigor as we have already done in the past. The historic legacy of past generations, which constitutes our most precious asset, has been threatened by the emergence of drug trafficking in our national life during the last 2 decades. Drug trafficking, with all the financial resources it produces, has been the main catalyst of violence in our country. Drug trafficking has distributed enormous sums of money among different social sectors and nurtured intense cycles of corruption. Drug trafficking has displaced our country's traditional agricultural geography with illegal crops, and its expansion has fostered the colonization of new territories. In those regions, and given the illegal nature of this activity, drug trafficking has unleashed a dramatic violence with very high social costs, bringing conflict and poverty with it. However, Colombia, in spite of not having the resources to confront this threat, has never yielded to drug trafficking. On the contrary, we have sacrificed too many of our best men and women, deviated large sums of money which could have been better used in social development. Our country has assumed its share of this transnational crime with great integrity and courage. But as we strive to distribute the burden of confronting this crime evenly, Colombia has to continue its historic path of building a social rule of law so it can insert itself positively in the globalized world of the 21st century. My government was worked relentlessly on the attainment of this goal by standing up to each and every challenge imposed on us by the present juncture with great courage. We confront our problems with more than just decision. Above all, we confront them with a long-term perspective as we build our future amidst much incomprehension and sacrifice. On my first day in office, I announced that we will change the country's direction radically and that we will do so respecting our democratic and constitutional institutions at all times. My decision is based on the fact that Colombia had accrued a series of problems whose solution cannot be postponed any longer with simplistic formulas. We never promised miracles because we knew that we were dealing with problems nurtured in a complex mesh of historic processes. We promised instead serious and responsible work, audacity to seek creative solutions, tenacity to confront adversity, and courage to apply the corrective measures regardless of how painful these could be. We identify violence, corruption, and the poverty resulting from unemployment, unbalanced public expenditure, and weakening of the state as our most pressing problems. We have acted on each of these fronts without hesitation, and today, positive results speak for themselves. During the last 4 decades, Colombia has had to bear the social cost of an armed conflict that is bleeding our country to death, in which is financed with the illegal revenues of drug trafficking. My government assumed the challenge of overcoming this conflict through negotiation and dialogue, for this is the mandate entrusted to us by millions of Colombians. Yet, I must be clear, because the international community has frequently been confused regarding the true dimension of this conflict. There is not a civil war in Colombia. A civil war exists when the sons of a nation confront each other in bands grouping the majority of its inhabitants. But this is not the case in Colombia. Our country has some 40 million inhabitants. Illegal armed groups, that is the guerrilla and the paramilitary, do not even amount to 35,000. They represent less than 1,000 of the population, and their popular support does not even reach 3% of all Colombians. The overwhelming majority of Colombians wants peace and not confrontation, and I am committed to that goal. Today, I can proudly say that we have accomplished more in 1.5 years than what was ever imaginable for many years. We have initiated a process of negotiations with a defined agenda and procedures with the FARC, the largest and oldest guerrilla group in the country. The negotiations are progressing at a slow but steady pace with the cooperation and the participation of the entire nation. Last Sunday, we initiated the first of a series of what we call public hearings, where the different sectors of Colombia will present their formulas for advancing in the field of employment and economic reactivation to a thematic committee made up by members of Colombian institutions and the guerrilla. These formulas will be discussed at the next table of negotiations, and we have also initiated dialogues with the ELN with the purpose of initiating negotiations in the near future. Not long ago, the negotiators of the FARC and government visited several European countries with the purpose of looking at different economic models and discussing the different world problems of the new millennium. In particular, they talked about the moral imperative of humanizing the conflict by ensuring the respect for international humanitarian law by the guerrilla. My government is deeply committed to implement minimum human standards to ease, at least in part, the suffering caused by the internal conflict to its victims and the civil population. To this end, we have incorporated in our legislation the Ottawa Convention on the banning and destruction of anti-personnel mines. Likewise, we have exempted from military service all those under the age of 18, thus going beyond the Convention on the Rights of Children. We have decided to continue the dialogues in the midst of the confrontation, yet we hope for acts of peace. In the meantime, we will continue fulfilling our constitutional duty of safeguarding the order and tranquility of our citizens. To this end, we are enhancing the armed forces' efficiency within the framework of the respect for human rights. We are also working on achieving a Colombia free from corruption. In our struggle against this plague, we have undertaken a comprehensive strategy combining repressive and preventing actions. The first are carried out in the coordination with the state control agencies and the citizens' participation. This coordination, tested for the very first time in many years, has yielded excellent results, and what is even more important, it has given citizens renewed faith in the state's ability to attack corruption. Furthermore, common citizens may use public hearings to denounce the corrupt before such agency, and such agencies commit to respond promptly. This mechanism has given rise to many investigations that have ended in the arrest and dismissal of many civil servants involved in corrupt acts. Modernize political parties, combat corruption at all levels in our civil service, with the purpose of making our National Congress and other collective bodies more representative and transparent. This democratic mechanism, enshrined in our own Constitution, will allow the people of Colombia to decide the changes they want to implement in the country's political institutions and when they want these changes to be implemented. We are certain that the proposal contained in the referendum will receive full support, thereby clearing the road to continue our task of modernizing the states. As is tradition in our country, always loyal to the rule of law as the best guarantor of political and economic stability, these measures' political reforms will be conducted pursuant to the precepts and procedures set forth in our national constitution. Arbitrary actions do not prosper in Colombia. What prospers is the soundness and security of the institution's venue. We are also working on recovering our economy. To this end, we have adopted drastic fiscal adjustments, measures and other measures to streamline our public administration with the purpose of reducing the central state deficit in the course of the next few years. In coming weeks, Congress will study other measures required for putting our public finances on a sound footing and stimulate industrial production. We have been both responsible in the austere in preparing the state budget. We are implementing strict fiscal discipline because we are convinced that in so doing, we will foster an environment better suited for developing private business. These measures are aimed at ensuring that the country's future economic growth be based on solid foundations and not on deceptive foundations that will disappear as soon as the first crisis arises. I am pleased to see that the measures adopted have started to show their success and that the country's economic look is promising. Interest rates have dropped to half of what they were a year ago. Inflation stands at the lowest level in 3 decades. The foreign account deficit has been substantially reduced, and the multilateral agencies have cleared the exchange scenario by renewing their trust in our country. On the other hand, the productive sector showed clear signs of growing recovery, and everything leads us to believe that we are back on the road to sustained growth. All these actions in favor of peace, transparency, and efficiency of the public administration and fiscal and economic management are aimed at strengthening the state's institutional presence as a basic and undifferable prerequisite for the country to find its place in the world of globalization. And this is the perspective in which we have framed Plan Colombia, the plan presented to the international community of nations. This is the plan which our country confronts the challenge of recovering the central state's responsibilities, the advancement of democracy, generating the conditions for employment, the respect for human rights, the search for peace, and the struggle against drug trafficking. The strategies that make up Plan Colombia constitute the most ambitious effort ever deployed by Colombians in their attempt to build the type of state they will lead them into the future. We are confident that we will receive the support of friendly nations interested in paying fair tribute to the courage and sacrifice made by our country in the past decades. The plan is not, as I said in certain circles of opinion, a solution of force against drug trafficking. It is, above all, a social plan for building and strengthening institutions countrywide, focusing mainly on giving the poorest Colombians and those most needed more alternatives for solving their problems. Plan Colombia includes the Social Emergency Fund. This fund will receive $900 million for the promotion and employment of unskilled labor in the construction of infrastructure works yielding benefits for the community. It will also be used for granting direct subsidies to low-income families, for guaranteeing the health and education of their children, and to train the poorest, youngest of the country and provide them with better labor opportunities. The social objectives of Plan Colombia include allocating over $2 billion to an integral development alternative. The alternative seeks, besides the mere substitution of illegal crops by legal crops, the promotion of regional development in areas affected by violence or drug trafficking through physical and social infrastructure works, and paying special attention to the population that has fallen victim of any form of violence. We are inviting the international community to participate in Plan Colombia. Plan Colombia is a social plan for the Colombia of the 21st century, a Colombian peace that provides employment opportunity to its people, having strong institutions and a sound economy, walking the road to progress and social justice, all with the active participation of the international community in the struggle against the global drug problem. We are rebuilding Colombia with the will and courage of all Colombians, with my government's firm decision and with the solidarity of many friendly nations, such as the United Kingdom. Dear friends, the history of all peoples may be read as a succession of ups and downs, of falls and uprisings. But man's free will has always allowed him to overcome any fall and to build prosperity as you, the British, have best taught us. Colombians have lived the winter of their misfortune, yet I have no doubt that we are starting to live, as we do today, the spring of our hopes. We have the ability to do so. We are not a people of violent, mediocre, or corrupt men and women, as some have simplistically tried to label us. On the contrary, we are a people fighting against many adversities and who are starting to recover our faith in our best values and ability to move forward. A former president of Colombia, Alberto Lleras Camargo, one of the greatest statesmen and architects of the civilian and democratic Colombia of the 20th century, once wrote in the quiet years of his old age, Nothing can be worse for any people than getting used to hearing the most horrendous prophecies and the most devastating announcement singled out as the whippings of a people weakness. Certainly, there are not evil people. Throughout history, there are times of corruption and fraud, of crime and impunity, followed by a saving reaction and even by excessive puritanism. We must open the road so freedom can bring about changes without the use of force or despotism. Humanity may continue its road to ascent persistently, and each era will be better than the one before it. Perseverance is all that is required. Keep working, because no one must feel defeated before they start. I invite all of you to join Colombia in this commitment with hope in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. And can I say, President Pastrana's happy to answer questions if anyone would like to ask questions for a few moments. Is there anybody to give a comment or a question on that visionary address? Can I see, please, Tam?
I'd like to ask the President if he feels as strongly about an anonymous flag
Sorry.
Yes.
Could you use the microphone, please?
I think it's
Sorry.
Are you referring to money laundering?
Yes. It's a question on money laundering.
Yes. Okay.
And the existence in the West of anonymous numbered bank accounts.
This was one of the issues we discussed today with Prime Minister Blair and with Secretary Cook, because we're very worried about the drug business. As you will know, drug business is one of the largest businesses in the world. I think it's only compared with oil. They said it's $500 billion a year. And that money is not in Colombia or in Bolivia or in Peru. Definitely, we need to work together in all the strategy, not only of money laundering, in our own countries and outside, all the cooperation that we could have on legislation. We're working on that with different countries of the world. But definitely, we need to work hand by hand to avoid precisely that all this drug money, it's in different banks around the world. While a peasant in Colombia earns 1.5 minimum salary for growing cocaine or poppy, all the gains are in other hands. So that's why we need to work in intelligence cooperation, money laundering cooperation. We've talked about contraband. That's the best way of money laundering in many of our countries. And that's why it's one of the examples, for example, is British American, that we just signed an agreement, the first one in the world, of contraband, avoiding contraband to Colombia. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we could show to the world. How can private sector and government work together in eradicating one of the worst cancers that is also money laundering to these type of businesses. And even we've gone, not only, we talked today with Prime Minister Blair about money laundering, but also if we want to destroy this business, I'm pointing out something that should be very important for us, that it's the union between the countries, basically the European countries, in fighting the arrival of chemicals and precursors to our countries. Why? Because I think 2 points that I want to mention here. I've said that it's impossible to have cocaine without coca leaf. And it's impossible to produce heroin without latex come from the poppy plant. But at the same time, it's impossible to develop or to have cocaine without ether or acetone and many precursor chemicals. And most of them are coming from Europe. So that's why I think we need to strengthen our relations in trying to get a policy regarding these type of chemicals that are going to our countries. And secondly, I point out also the damage that it's doing the drug not only to our children in the schools and play yards, but also to the environment. And I want to call the attention here in Europe on that. In the case of Colombia, as you will know, Colombia is the second largest country in biodiversity in the world. Some scientists said Colombia is the first one. But if we're the second largest country in biodiversity, the drug business is also destroying the environment and the biodiversity. I only want to say that Colombia, we have more or less 3,000 kilometers of rivers. Many of the labs are located on the riverside. And the rivers are used as a highway of getting in arms, chemicals, explosives. And at the same time, the rivers are used as the highway to get out drugs. But many of these labs that are located on the riverside throw all these chemicals to the rivers, and most of these rivers, the largest rivers, go to the rainforest, destroying the rainforest. So that's why we want to point out that we need to create the conscience in Europe. In the case of Colombia, we have destroyed in the last years about 1 million hectares of rainforest. And every time we're pushing or trying to push drug lords out of our country, they're going southern and southern, and now they're trying to attack the largest rainforest, that is the Amazon. And as you will know, the Amazon produces 60% of the world. So also the drug is a problem that is affecting Europe and is affecting us. And that's why we need to see this other side: money laundering, contraband, environment. And in the case of Colombia, if we win over the drug lords, also we could achieve sooner a peace process. Because all the actors in Colombia, call them guerrillas, paramilitaries, or even common delinquency, is very well financed or are financed by narcotics or the drug lords. So that's why we need also the commitment of the international community in fighting this problem.
Lord David Montgomery, and then I'll come back across.
Montgomery, Vice President, Canning House. Mr. President, I wonder if you could say something about your relations with Colombia, with the other your neighboring countries in the Andean community, and also in the wider context of the development of regional economic cooperation and development of trade within the various organizations which are being planned.
I think our relations are excellent with our friends, with Venezuela, with Peru, with Brazil, with Ecuador. Now we have the temporary secretary of the Rio Group, and that's something that we have been really working very hard to look forward integration in our hemisphere. In the case of Colombia, we're pushing very hard on the group of three, Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia, because I think that we have a common market, that it's Central America, that we could work together in that way. And that's why we're looking forward to strengthen the group of three, and also the Rio Group. So I think our relations right now are excellent. We know that we all have problems. We know that in all our governments we're fighting, and I think the war that unites all of us is the fight against poverty. We know that we have problems, but we're doing all the best to invest the resources. Maybe sometimes are not as huge as we want, for being invested in social development and this social safety net. But that's the efforts we're doing to avoid the type of problems that we are having. For example, and I only want to put as an example, the agreement we signed last year with the IMF, I think is going to be an example for the region and for the world. For the first time, we not only signed the agreement with the IMF, but at the same time, we got resources for the social investment. So I think that was something that is very important and as an example, and that's what I refer in my speech as social safety net funds that through the World Bank and the IDB, in agreement with the IMF, we are going to invest in the next 3 years in the poorest people of our country.
I think I saw another hand over there. Could I take yours, sir?
Thank you. Neil Jeffrey, Oxfam. Mr. President, we were delighted to hear of your commitment to the social plan, which would include a plan that would benefit the poorest people in Colombia. However, as an organisation, we are concerned that Plan Colombia was drawn up apparently without full consultation with civil society in Colombia. And maybe you could tell us of future plans to include that civil society in drawing up such a social plan.
I really thank you for that question. Plan Colombia consists of three big issues. The peace process. I haven't heard one voice against the peace process. Second, Plan Colombia, as I said before, it's including $2 billion for the social sector. Basically, as I explained, building what we call manos a la obra, hands to the work, building roads, reconstruction, schools, small investments in small municipalities. That's what we are proposing with these funds. Creating employment, and I haven't heard one voice against this second part of the Plan Colombia. And the third one, the third pillar of the plan, is to strengthen our institutions. Human rights education, strengthen the judiciary system, and giving strength to all the institutions of the country. So I haven't heard one voice against the Plan Colombia that it's based on these three pillars. I said that the Plan Colombia is the plan of the poor people of Colombia. And that's why we not only explain the plan publicly by the President in an open interview in the TV, an intervention of the President, even we consulted the Plan Colombia with the Foreign Relations Commission, in which they have seen all the former presidents of Colombia and the opposition parties. And third, not only the DMP Managing Director, National Planning Director, even one of Jaime Ruiz that is here, and now Mauricio Cárdenas have been many times in the Congress of Colombia explaining Plan Colombia, and I think that the country and outside of the country we have full support for this project. We haven't heard really one voice against investing in the poorest people of our country. I think there's a lady.
Emma Thomas, Latin American Newsletters. I just wanted to ask about the recent assassination plots that have been uncovered against Victor Ricardo and Alfonso Gomez, which have been attributed to the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia. I wanted to know your opinion as to whether you think that the Autodefensas are trying to damage the peace process.
Yesterday I was included in that list, so now we're three. One of the things I want to be clear is that my government is fighting all the actors of the violence in Colombia, call them guerrilla or paramilitaries. And that's my commitment. And that's what we are asking our armed forces to do. And now I think we're starting to show good results in this fight against the paramilitary and also against the guerrilla movements. I've said to the paramilitaries several times in public speeches, ask them to give up peace and opportunity, that cease all massacres. And we're asking the paramilitaries, as we're asking the guerrilla, that we need to take a part of this conflict, civil society, humanizing the war that we're involved in the last 40 years. And at the end, the only thing I think that we all Colombians want, and the international community is supporting us on that, is trying to reach peace through negotiation and a dialogue. So we hope that the Autodefensas will, as even some days the leader of the Autodefensas, Castaño, said that he was willing to lower the intensity of the conflict, but we really hope for all the actors that they will respect the international humanitarian law and human rights.
One over here, one more. That's all.
Mr. President, one of the reasons I think that many people are leaving our country and not coming to invest is the fear of being kidnapped. Do you foresee any possibility that this huge problem that we're facing and not being able to maybe go back, do you foresee a possibility that this is going to stop?
Yes. It's not easy. As you know, I think that's one of the worst crimes. I was kidnapped myself, so I know personally what's to be kidnapped. My father-in-law was killed in a kidnapping. So I think that's one of the commitments we have in our country. That's the worst crime that could be committed in the human person. And what we're trying to do is, first of all, I think that we need to change the strategy that we had in the last years. We need more commitment of the police, of the armed forces, of the civil society in working together. Only 2 weeks ago, we created a special force, task force inside the government to fight kidnapping, in which is involved the chief commander of the army, the chief commander of the police, the minister of defense, the government, the Office of Security of the Presidency of Colombia. And we hope to develop two things. Tougher laws. I think that we need to get some more than tougher laws, a legislation that will allow us to confront this crime. Because we have to be clear that even that we had worked in Colombia to elevate the sentence, the prison sentence, at the end, a kidnapper would be in jail only for 7 or 9 years. My case, only 1 year ago, the kidnapper, one of my kidnappers, that they kidnapped me in 1988, now is free in the streets. So I think that we need to bring tougher legislation. And that's what we're studying with the Minister of Justice and what we're studying inside the government. But at the same time, I think that we need a different strategy, that we're working with the armed forces and with the intelligence security forces to strengthen all the equipment that we have to fight kidnapping, a more close relation between the different organisms of the states that are involved in this problem, and we think that we could start advancing in bringing down the numbers of kidnapping in our country. I want to, one thing, because sometimes there's a lot of information of the number of people kidnapped in Colombia, and many times when they stop our people in the streets or in the roads of Colombia for 1 or 2 hours, that figures appears as a kidnap, and really that's what they call a pesca milagrosa. Many of them are out only hours after. But I think the figures are very high, and that's why we're trying to concentrate all the efforts of the government in strengthening and looking for a new strategy regarding this crime.
Did the UK make any commitments for Plan Colombia today?
With our meeting with Secretary Cook and Prime Minister Blair, I think that was even the proposal of a trip to look to support from the UK to the Plan Colombia. I think that, as Secretary Cook proposed, it's very important for us, this technical mission that we are going to send to discuss with all the members of the European Union our projects that we were going to take to the table, donors table, on the first week of July. For us, it's fundamental, the support of the UK, and Prime Minister Blair and Secretary Cook were very committed in helping Colombia, and we hope that we could get the amount of money that we want from this donors table the first week of July in Madrid.
Yesterday you were in the United States. What's your feelings about the delay in the aid for the emergency package from the United States?
Yeah, the aid is not going to be delayed. Really what happened is that now the House and the Senate go into recess for 1 week, the Senate 2 weeks, the House. We spoke with Senator Lott yesterday. He was very committed in take the aid package of the United States in the last week of May, first week of June. So we hope that we could get these aid out as soon as possible from the Senate. They are very committed. We had the opportunity to speak to Speaker Huster. Senator Lott, Senator Dashwell. We had a very interesting meeting with the Foreign Relations Committee, so we hope that we could get these resources or this aid package as soon as possible.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the referendum and if that might not slow down some of the economic reforms that you mentioned earlier. There's a lot of talk about that, and Restrepo also has said that you might not be able to meet targets.
No, I think as I don't know if you know our meeting we had yesterday and the day before yesterday with the IMF and the Secretary of Treasury, Larry Summers. We had all the reforms except the social pension reform in the Congress. We hope to get these laws out of Congress at the end of this legislature, the ones that are right now. The legislature in Colombia ends the 16th of June. We hope, and I think that what we've been saying is that these reforms are needed for the country. Even these reforms, the results of these reforms will also be seen in 3, 4, 5 years, and that's why we are also asking the Congress that we all have the responsibility to take these reforms out of Congress. The pension reform or the social reform, we're starting making some adjustments, and we hope that we could present it this year or this legislature to the Congress. And even if we have the referendum, as we hope, the new Congress will be a working session starting the 1st of December, so even in that time we could get the second package of reforms to the new Congress if the referendum is approved and if the Colombian people approve to elect a new Congress. So I think we are on the right time on the schedule, and now we hope that to have the support from the Congress to get these reforms out.
Me interesaría saber cómo recibe usted la noticia de la tregua unilateral del TLN y cuáles van a ser las medidas tomadas después de finalizada esta tregua.
Bueno, nosotros con el ELN, yo creo que todos los gestos de paz son bienvenidos en el país. Y nosotros hemos insistido, estamos reiterando y estamos dialogando con el Ejército de Liberación Nacional. Nosotros lo que aspiramos como gobierno es a que podamos muy prontamente iniciar este proceso de negociación y de esta manera poder, así como estamos trabajando hoy de la mano con la FARC en una agenda con 12 puntos, podamos iniciar precisamente y desarrollar la Convención Nacional que se ha propuesto. Estamos dialogando, pero yo aspiro muy rápidamente a que podamos iniciar este proceso de negociación.
Sí, presidente Óscar Rodríguez Aguilar, soy comentarista económico para varios medios y soy colombiano. Mi pregunta es la siguiente: me ha llamado mucho la atención la parte de su discurso en la cual asevera de que no hay guerra civil en Colombia. Me parece original, pero también me parece importante y quisiera que usted tal vez entrara en más detalle respecto a eso, en primer lugar. Y segundo, vinculado obviamente a esa pregunta, si hay alguna forma en la cual usted pueda responder por qué se ha demorado tanto la tendencia de todos los anteriores gobiernos en entrar en un proceso de negociación de paz con las fuerzas sublevadas, y por último, cuál es el presupuesto militar del Plan Colombia y de la partida de Estados Unidos que le va a conceder a Colombia para este plan.
Bueno, hay varias preguntas.
Disculpe, pero están...
A ver, pero una muy rápidamente. Usted sabe, el Plan Colombia consta de 7.5 billones de dólares. Los colombianos estamos aportando casi 5 billones de dólares. Le estamos pidiendo a la comunidad internacional 2.5 billones, de los cuales el 25% iría a la interdicción, es decir, a todo lo que tiene que ver con la lucha contra el narcotráfico desde el punto de vista militar. 75% de ese presupuesto a todo el tema social, desarrollo alternativo, proyectos productivos, fortalecimiento institucional. Ese es básicamente los porcentajes de lo que estamos invirtiendo. Guerra civil en el país no existe. Las guerras civiles existen cuando el país se encuentra absolutamente fracturado en dos bandos. Y resulta que en Colombia no estamos fracturados en dos bandos. Aquí hay 35.000 miembros de la insurgencia y de los grupos armados contra 40 millones. Lo que tenemos es un conflicto interno y por eso estamos resolviendo un conflicto interno. Y para redondear con la última pregunta, pues claramente yo fui elegido precisamente con un mandato para realizar fundamentalmente dos cosas en el gobierno: combatir la corrupción, como lo estamos haciendo, y en segunda instancia hacer y desarrollar a cabo un proceso de negociación con los distintos grupos insurgentes. Hoy con la FARC tenemos 12 puntos en la agenda. Nos hemos puesto de acuerdo en el primer punto, que es el modelo económico. Aspiramos que en 6 meses podamos avanzar en este tema. Y de la mano con el Ejército de Liberación Nacional, como le estábamos respondiendo, aspiramos a que podamos iniciar muy rápidamente ese otro proceso de diálogo y de negociación. Sí.
Eso implica que al negociar la paz con las FARC, lo que falte por financiar en programas de educación es la contraposición a dejar el apoyo de los países.
No, la verdad es que, a ver, estamos hablando de una cifra que es mínima. El problema del narcotráfico no se resuelve con 1, con 2 o con 3 billones de dólares. Este es un tema a muy largo plazo y con muchos recursos que necesitamos. En el caso colombiano, lo que estamos haciendo es buscar mecanismos que nos permitan que quienes reinserten a la vida civil puedan tener un modus vivendi, un medio de vida, y darle a nuestros campesinos la oportunidad de la mano de sustituir cosechas ilícitas, caso de la coca, caso de la amapola, por cosechas lícitas, y de esta manera generar ingresos que les permitan a ellos también vivir.
Hola. ¿Me puede aclarar sobre la cuestión de una zona neutral con el ELN?
Se está discutiendo.
Ellos quieren en el norte del país, ¿verdad?
Se está discutiendo. Con el Ejército de Liberación Nacional hay propuestas y contrapropuestas y estamos hablando sobre esa posibilidad.
Porque pensaba que las autodefensas unidas estaban muy fuertes en el norte del país y por eso que estaba difícil...
Pero ellos lo han pedido, inclusive en el norte de Colombia, a pesar de la presencia de las autodefensas. Pero este es un proceso en que estamos de negociación con el Ejército de Liberación Nacional. No se ha definido todavía. Okay. Bueno, gracias. Muy bien, mucho gusto.
¿Sí es su padre?
Estamos hablando de que, como lo dijo el propio senador Ladd, por los procedimientos existentes dentro de la legislación americana, nosotros esperamos de que podamos tener la ayuda del Plan Colombia saliendo o bien la última semana de mayo, como dijo el senador, o la primera de junio. Entonces yo creo que hay un compromiso muy importante que además va a ser importante para Europa, como una señal de que los Estados Unidos quieren colaborar y participar en el programa del Plan Colombia. En segunda instancia, el presidente Clinton nos reafirmó su compromiso de seguir trabajando por el Plan Colombia y buscar lo más rápido que podamos obtener estos recursos. Y en el caso de Inglaterra yo creo que hay dos temas que son importantes, en que el Reino Unido, su propio primer ministro ha dicho que quiere trabajar, que quiere colaborar en el Plan Colombia. Usted se ha dado cuenta de que aquí también en el caso del Reino Unido se comienza a ver que hay gran preocupación por parte del primer ministro de su gobierno sobre el tema de las drogas, por lo tanto hay un gran compromiso por parte de ellos. El secretario o el ministro de Relaciones Exteriores, el secretario Cook, claramente ha dicho que ellos están dispuestos a convocar también aquí en Inglaterra la posibilidad de una mesa que permita hacer un análisis más en profundidad y aportar elementos que permitan también, pues si se puede mejorar lo que en este momento estamos llevando a la mesa de donantes. Usted sabe que tenemos la ayuda del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, ya están los proyectos, así que muy rápidamente podemos sostener esta reunión para fortalecer la posición colombiana en lo que corresponde a la mesa de donantes.
Presidente, gracias.
Bueno.